There is a gate on a spur road in the Oregon Coast Range that has been locked since the summer of 2017. The sign bolted to it says the closure is for a sensitive species land use review. That sign has been there long enough that the paint has gone chalky and the bottom corner has rusted through. Nobody has driven past it in years. The timber behind it was flagged for a cut that never happened. And the survey packet that started the whole thing sits in a state office in Salem under a hold order that was never lifted. I have talked to the man who took the photograph. He is a land surveyor named Gordon Priest. And in the summer of 2017, he was 51 years old and had been running survey line in the Coast Range for most of his adult life. He does not want the drainage named. He will let me say the county. He will not let me say the creek. What he will tell you is this. The road did not close because of an owl. It closed because of one photograph, and then it closed harder because of a second one. And the man who took the second one did not come back to the truck the way he left it. That is the part that never made it onto the sign. Gordon still has a copy of the first photograph. It is a third-generation copy, a picture of a print, and the quality is bad, and he keeps it in a drawer and does not look at it. The original was requested by a state desk in Salem within a week of the closure and was never returned. He asked for it back twice. After the second time, a man he had never met came out to the district office and told him, in a friendly enough way, that he should stop asking. He stopped asking, but he kept the copy. And he keeps a copy of the closure order too, because the dates on it do not line up. And Gordon has spent a lot of years staring at how they do not line up. I found Gordon the way you find men like Gordon, which is slowly, through other people, through a forestry man who knew a man who knew a man, and when I finally sat across from him, he did not want to talk. And then he did, all at once, the way a man talks who has been carrying a thing alone for a long time, and has decided you are as good a place to set part of it down as any. He is retired now. He lives in a small town in the Willamette Valley, and he keeps to himself, and he does not go into the Coast Range anymore. Not to hunt, not to fish, not for work he could still get if he wanted it. He told me he has driven the highway that passes nearest the drainage exactly twice in 7 years, and both times he kept his eyes on the road. And both times he felt the gate up that spur road pulling at him the whole way past, the way a sore tooth pulls at your tongue, real or fake. By the end of this, you decide. Let me tell you how the photograph moved, because that matters more than you would think. Gordon shot it on a Tuesday morning in late July of 2017. It went into his survey packet the same day, time-stamped, logged, the frame number recorded in his field notes in his own handwriting. That packet went up to the district office on the Thursday. From the district, it went to the regional coordinator on the following Monday. And from regional, it went to a desk in Salem that nobody at the district level could put a name to. And from that desk came the request to hold the original and forward everything. That is a clean chain. Gordon is proud of clean chains. A survey record is a legal document, and a good surveyor can tell you where every page of it has been. He can tell you the name of every person who touched that packet at the district and the regional level. He cannot tell you the name of the person in Salem. That is where the chain goes dark. And it is the exact place, Gordon says, where his partner's second photograph should have been in the record and never was. Because there were 2 cameras that morning. There were 2 men on that gravel pad. And only one of them is in the paperwork. I want to walk you through the days before the photograph, because Gordon can walk you through them, one at a time. And he does it in a flat, quiet voice, like a man reading a list. The survey crew was 3 men, and Gordon made 4. They were laying out a new spur off an existing logging road, flagging the center line for a cut that had been sold to a timber operator that spring. Ordinary work. Gordon had done 100 of these. The drainage was steep and wet and thick with young Douglas fir, and the deer sign was heavy, and none of that was unusual. The first thing that was unusual happened on the Wednesday of the week before. They had hung flagging tape along a 1/4 mile of centerline, the pink ribbon tied off at eye height every few chains the way you do. When they came back the next morning, the tape along the last stretch had been moved. Not torn down, not scattered, moved. Retied lower at about knee height, in a line that ran maybe 15 feet off the center line they had flagged. Gordon assumed a hunter had done it, or a hiker, some idiot, playing a joke. He rehung the tape. It cost them an hour. The next morning, it was moved again, lower again. On the Thursday, the radio in Gordon's truck went dead in a way it had not before. They ran handhelds between the crew and the trucks, cheap units but reliable, and Gordon had never had trouble raising the landing pad from the top of the line. That Thursday, there was a stretch of center line up near where the tape kept moving, where the handhelds gave nothing but a low even hiss, no matter which channel he tried. He walked 40 feet back down the hill, and the hiss cleared, and he could raise the truck fine. He walked back up, and it was gone again. He marked the spot in his head as a dead zone, and thought no more of it, except that the next morning, the dead zone was wider. And the morning after that, it was wider still, as if the thing that killed the signal was spreading down the hill toward them, a little each night. On the Friday, one of the crew, a younger man Gordon will only call the kid, found a stack of survey lath snapped off at ground level. Survey lath is a wooden stake, and you do not snap it by stepping on it. You snap it by taking it in two hands and breaking it, and even then it fights you. There were 11 of them, snapped clean at the dirt line, stacked in a little pile like kindling, and laid across the top of the little pile. Gordon says, was a green Douglas fir bough, cut clean, not torn. A fresh branch as long as a man's arm placed across the broken stakes, like a thing set down on purpose. Gordon has thought about that bough more than he has thought about almost anything else from that summer. Because the tape and the stakes could be vandalism, could be a man, but a man does not lay a cut bough across his own vandalism, and an animal does not cut a bough at all. Gordon reported none of this to the district. There was nothing to report. Mauve tape and broken stakes are the kind of thing that happens on a job site when locals do not want a road. And the Coast Range has plenty of locals who do not want a road. And a man does not put in a report that says someone left a branch on his broken stakes. You would be laughed off the crew. They took the weekend. Gordon spent it not thinking about the drainage, which is its own way of thinking about the drainage. On the Sunday night, the kid called him at home, which the kid had never done, and asked in a careful voice whether Gordon had ever seen anything in those woods he had not been able to explain. Gordon said no. The kid said okay. The kid said he had been having dreams about the job. Gordon told him to get some sleep. On the Monday, they went back in. Gordon's partner that summer was a man named Perry Boyd, and I need to be careful here, because Gordon is careful here. He does not embellish. He tells it the way he saw it, and he flags the parts he only heard about later. Boyd was younger than Gordon, maybe 40. A good instrument man, steady. He and Gordon had run line together for 3 seasons. Gordon liked him. That is as much as Gordon will say about liking him, but you can hear the whole of it in how carefully he says the rest. On the Monday, Boyd started staying out, past the others. The crew would break for lunch at the trucks, which were parked on a wide gravel landing pad at the bottom of the spur, and Boyd would eat fast and go back up the line alone. Gordon told him to stop. Boyd said he kept seeing something at the tree line break, up where the flagging had been moved, same spot each time. Standing back in the shadow of the timber where the light did not reach, and gone by the time he got close. Gordon told him it was a bear. Boyd said a bear does not stand like that. Then he said something Gordon has not forgotten. He said it did not stand like it was watching the crew. He said it stood like it was waiting for one of them in particular, and that when he walked up the line toward it, he had the feeling he was the one it was waiting for. Gordon told him to knock it off and stay with the crew, and Boyd said he would, and he did not. On the Monday evening, Boyd showed Gordon his phone. He had tried to photograph the thing at the tree line that afternoon and gotten nothing. Just a wall of green timber, the shadow under it flat and empty. But he had gotten it on the last frame, he said. A shape at the edge of the tree line that was there, and then, in the next frame, was not. And the 2 frames were 4 seconds apart by the timestamp. And Gordon looked at both, and could not honestly say the shape was a Sasquatch, and could not honestly say it was nothing. He said it was probably a stump. Boyd said the stump had not been there the day before, and would not be there tomorrow, and Gordon did not have an answer for that, so he gave none. On the Tuesday morning, Boyd was quiet in a way he had not been. He rode up to the landing pad in Gordon's truck, and he did not say much. And when Gordon asked if he had slept, Boyd said he had not, that he had lain awake with the feeling that the thing from the tree line was standing in his own yard at home, out past his fence, waiting, though he lived 30 miles from the drainage in a town with streetlights. Gordon told him he needed a day off. Boyd said, "Maybe after this one." On the Tuesday morning, they were all four at the landing pad before the heat came up. The gravel pad was open, an old widening in the road where the equipment turned around, maybe 100 feet across, bounded on the far side by the wall of timber. There was fog burning off the trees. Gordon was at the tailgate of his truck sorting lath. And that morning, before any of it, there had been the smell. Gordon almost forgot to tell me about the smell, because it does not fit into a story the way a shape at the tree line fits, but it was there before the shape was. And the kid had noticed it too. A thick animal reek that rolled across the landing pad on no wind at all. A wet dog and rot smell heavy enough that Gordon's eyes watered. That came from everywhere and nowhere. That was there for a slow count of 30 and then gone as if a door had shut on it. Gordon had smelled dead elk in summer. This was not that. This was something alive and unwashed and close. And it arrived, he says, like a warning that none of them knew how to read. The kid saw it first. He did not say anything. He just stopped moving, and Gordon looked up because a man stopping moving is louder than a man shouting when you have worked with him long enough. There was a Sasquatch standing at the edge of the gravel. I am going to give you the description the way Gordon gave it to me, because he has clearly gone over it in his head more times than he wanted to, and because he does not reach for it the way a man reaches for a story. He reaches for it the way a man reaches for a splinter he cannot get out. It was standing full height at the far edge of the pad where the gravel met the timber, and it was over 7 feet tall, and it read as far more Neanderthal than ape. It had a heavy bony brow ridge that put its eyes in shadow, a broad prominent nose, a wide flat human-like face with no muzzle to it at all, which was the thing that turned Gordon's stomach, because a face with no muzzle is a face that looks back at you. Its hair was dark rust brown across the shoulders and shading to charcoal down the arms, matted and hanging in weathered ropes. Where the skin showed at the face, it was a weathered gray-brown. The eyes caught the flat morning light and threw it back, 2 dull coins. And there was a torn notch out of the top of its left ear, an old healed injury, the kind of specific ordinary detail that Gordon says he has never been able to talk himself out of. It was not moving. It was standing with its arms hanging and its weight square, and it was looking at them across the gravel. And it was so much bigger than the men that the scale of it did not make sense against the trucks behind it. Gordon says the first thing he felt was not fear. It was a kind of falling, like the ground had tilted, because his whole life he had known there was nothing in these woods that could stand there and look at him like that. And here was the thing his whole life had been wrong about, standing at the edge of an ordinary gravel pad on an ordinary Tuesday. He had a camera on a strap around his neck, a field camera for documenting site conditions. His hands came up on their own and he took one frame. That is the photograph. What happened next is the part Gordon says slowly, and the part where he starts flagging what he saw against what he only pieced together after. Boyd moved toward it. Gordon says he called out. He says Boyd did not stop. Boyd had his own camera up and he was walking across the gravel toward the thing at the tree line, fast, in a straight line, the way you walk when you have decided something and do not want to give yourself time to undecide it. Gordon says he watched the distance close. 100 feet, 80. Boyd was getting the shot Gordon had not gotten, the close one, the one that would settle it. The Sasquatch did not move. It stood and let him come. And that stillness, Gordon says, was the worst thing he has ever seen. Worse than if it had charged. Because a thing that lets you walk up to it is a thing that is not afraid of you and has a reason not to be. At about 40 feet, Boyd stopped and raised the camera to his eye. And then, Gordon says, and here he is careful. Here he says he cannot swear to the order of things because it happened in less time than it takes to tell. There was the tree line. And there was Boyd at the edge of it. And there was a sound Gordon felt more than heard. A low knock of wood on wood from back in the timber. More than one of them, from more than one direction. And the light under the trees moved. And Boyd was not where he had been. The Sasquatch was gone. Boyd was gone. The gravel pad was just a gravel pad with the fog coming off it. Gordon and the kid and the third man stood at the trucks and did not move for what Gordon thinks was a full minute. Then they started shouting Boyd's name. They found his hard hat at the edge of the timber. They found one of his boots 40 feet inside the tree. Line upright, laced, standing in the duff as if he had stepped out of it. They did not find Boyd. They spent the rest of that day looking. Gordon called it in from the truck, from the landing pad, because the handhelds were useless up the line, and it took the sheriff most of 2 hours to get a deputy up the spur. And by then, Gordon and the kid and the third man had walked the timber above the pad, calling until they were hoarse. The deputy took a report. Search and rescue came the next morning. And here is the first thing that was strange. The first crack in what should have been an ordinary tragedy, a man lost in the woods. By the second afternoon of the ground search, the county people were gone, and other people were there instead. People with dogs that were not sheriff's dogs. A man in clean boots with a vehicle that had no markings, directing lines of searchers, who did not talk to the crew and did not talk to each other much either. Gordon was told to go home. He was told the search was in good hands. He was told in a friendly enough way that his crew's part in it was done. Gordon did not want to go home. Boyd was his partner. But you learn, on a job site, to read the tone of a man who is telling you to leave, and this man's tone was not a request. They found the camera later. I will come back to the camera. Now I want to lay 2 pieces of paper next to each other. Because this is the part Gordon has spent 7 years on, and it is the part that turned a bad day in the woods into something he cannot let go of. The first piece of paper is the closure order. The road was gated 72 hours after the photograph. 72 hours. Anyone who has ever waited on a state agency to do anything will tell you that 72 hours is not a government timeline. It is an emergency timeline. And the order did not come from the district office, which is who manages that road, and it did not come from the regional office. It came from a desk in Salem, signed by a name Gordon did not recognize and could never afterward attach to a real person in any directory he searched. The stated reason was a sensitive species land use review, spotted owl habitat. Here is the second piece of paper. The species survey that the closure cites as its justification is dated 3 weeks before the photograph. It describes survey work in the drainage that Gordon's crew never saw anyone doing, in a drainage they had been working in for a month. And it recommends a closure that had not been enacted, in language that reads, Gordon says, like it was written to be found later, and to explain something that had not happened yet. Gordon knows what a real spotted owl survey looks like because he has worked around them for 30 years. You hear the crews at dawn and dusk doing call and response, playing the recorded hoots, waiting on an answer. You see their flagging, a different color from timber flagging, hung along their own grid. You see their trucks. In a month of working that drainage, Gordon and his crew had seen none of it. No dawn crews, no owl flagging, no trucks that were not theirs. The survey that the closure leans on describes weeks of field work that, as far as 4 men who were in that drainage every day could tell, never happened. And the biologist named on the survey, when Gordon finally ran the name down years later, was real, but had retired from the agency 2 years before the date on the document. A retired man's name on a survey he could not have done, dated before an event it was written to cover. The dates do not line up. A closure signed off in 72 hours over a district that never asked for it, justified by a survey dated before the event that triggered it, signed by a biologist who was no longer employed to sign it, and there was a man on site during the closure who was not forestry. Gordon saw him once at the gate the week the road went down, clean boots, a vehicle with no agency markings. He was directing people who were not loggers and were not surveyors, people with dogs, people walking grid lines through the timber below the pad. Nobody introduced him. When Gordon asked the district contact who he was, the district contact said he did not know, and said it in a way that meant stop asking. Here is what Gordon believes now, laid out plain, and I will let you weigh it. He believes the road did not close for an animal, and it did not close for an owl. He believes it closed for the days of ground search that happened after Boyd did not come out of the timber. Trucks and dogs and people who were not loggers, working a grid through the drainage below the gravel pad, inside a locked gate with a land use sign on it. A search that nobody was ever going to call a search. Because, to call it a search, you would have to say what they were searching for. And to say what they were searching for, you would have to put the word Sasquatch on a state document. So instead, they put an owl on it. And they held Gordon's photograph. The third crewman, the one Gordon has not said much about, the older man who had been at the trucks with Gordon and the kid, quit surveying entirely before the summer was out. Gordon heard he had moved his family to the eastern side of the state, to the dry country. as far from timber as a man can get in Oregon and still be in Oregon. Gordon called him once, that fall. The man was polite. The man said he did not remember much about that day, which was a lie, and both of them knew it was a lie. And the man said it, the way you say a thing you have decided to make true by repeating, and Gordon let him have it, because he understood the wanting. Some men survive a thing by carrying it, some survive it by setting it down and walking into the dry country and never turning around. Gordon does not judge the walking, and within the week, Gordon himself was reassigned off the drainage entirely, sent to run line 2 counties away, and told, at one remove, through his own supervisor, that it would be better for everyone if he did not file anything further about the Boyd matter. The Boyd matter. That is the phrase that came down to him. Not the death, not the disappearance, the matter. Boyd's status in the paperwork, when Gordon finally saw it years later, is a phrasing that does not say what happened. It does not say he died. It does not say he vanished. It uses a term of art that means the file is closed and does not mean anything else. Gordon went to see Boyd's wife once, that fall, after he was allowed back into the county. He did not know what he was going to say. He sat in her front room and she made coffee, and she was calm in the way people are calm when they have decided the world has already done its worst and there is nothing left to be afraid of. She told Gordon that 2 men in a state vehicle had come to the house the week Boyd disappeared, before the sheriff had even finished the report, before there was a body or a finding or anything to bring to a widow, and that they had asked her, gently, whether Boyd had said anything to her about what he had seen at work, and whether he had brought anything home, any photographs, any video. She said he had not. She said the men had thanked her and left, and that a check had come after, larger than she had expected, from a fund she had never heard of, and that the check had felt less like help and more like a lid. She asked Gordon, before he left, whether her husband had suffered. Gordon told her he had not, which Gordon does not know to be true, and which he says was the only kind thing he had to give her, and which he would tell her again. He drove home from that visit and did not sleep. And in the morning, he started keeping the file he keeps to this day, the closure order and the phony survey, and the copy of his one photograph, all of it in a drawer, because he decided that morning that whatever else was true, the paper would not be allowed to be the only version that survived. The drainage sits inside a part of the coast range that shows up, if you know where to look, in the clustering work that David Paulides has published under the Missing 411 banner over the years. I'm not going to script words into Paulides' mouth, and I am not going to tell you what he thinks about this specific case, because he has never spoken about this specific case, and Gordon's drainage is not one Paulides has named. But the geography is not new geography. People have been walking into the timber in that stretch of Oregon and not walking back out for a lot longer than 2017. And the pattern of it, the way the searches get quiet, is old. You can read Paulides on the clustering yourself. That is where the sourcing on this ends and where the speculation would begin, and I am going to leave it at the edge of that line. The camera. I told you I would come back to it. Boyd's camera was recovered during the ground search, or so Gordon was told, because Gordon was not on the search by then. He was 2 counties away, running line, and being told not to ask. What he knows about the camera he knows second-hand from the kid, the young crewman, who stayed on the search a day longer than Gordon did before he too was reassigned. The kid told Gordon, years later, over a tailgate, half drunk and never again, that the camera was found inside the timber, past where the boot was. That it was intact. That someone from the closure, one of the clean boot people, took it before anyone on the crew could look at it. And that the kid had gotten close enough for 1 second to see the small screen on the back light up when the man switched it on. The kid would not tell Gordon what was on the screen. He said he was sorry. He said he wished he had never looked. He said the reason the order came down from Salem so fast, the reason the road went down in 72 hours, was on that screen, in one frame. The second frame, the close one, the shot Boyd walked 40 feet across the gravel to get. Gordon asked him one question. He asked whether the frame showed the Sasquatch. And the kid, Gordon says, looked at him for a long moment, and then said the strangest thing, the thing that Gordon has turned over more than any of the rest of it. The kid said it was not what the thing was doing that had frightened the man with the clean boots. It was where it was standing. He said the second photograph was taken from close, very close, closer than 40 feet, closer than any of them had been, and that the angle was low, as if the camera had been held near the ground, and that in the frame you could see, behind the Sasquatch, back in the timber, that it was not the only one. And then the kid stopped talking about it. For good. And Gordon has never pushed him, because Gordon says he does not actually want to know. He has the copy of his own photograph in a drawer he does not open. That is as close as he wants to stand to it. There is a difference, he told me, between wondering what happened to a man and knowing, and he has spent 7 years living in the wondering on purpose, because the wondering he can survive, and he is not sure the knowing would leave him anything. The gate is still locked. The sign is still rusting. The survey line Gordon flagged that summer is still in the record, a center line for a road that will never be built, running up a drainage that the state of Oregon has decided, for reasons it has written down in a language designed to mean nothing, that no one needs to go into again. Real or fake, you decide. The deed to our property has a clause in it that I ignored. And I want to tell you what ignoring it cost. And I want to tell you slowly, the way it happened to me. Because if I tell you fast, you will not believe the part at the end. And if I tell you slowly, you might. My name is Loomis Frayne. I am 44 years old. In the spring of 2017, my wife and I took over a rural lot in the Cascade foothills of Oregon. In a county I am going to keep to myself, on land that had been in the family in a loose way for a long time and came to us when my uncle passed. It was 11 acres, a plain house, a gravel pad where we kept a travel trailer for guests, 2 work trucks, and a tree line at the back of the lot where our cleared ground gave way to timber that ran up into the hills and did not stop. It was supposed to be a fresh start. That is the plain truth of it, and I want you to hold on to how ordinary the beginning was, because everything that happened after started from a decision that any of you would have made. My uncle sold nothing and left everything. And one of the things he left was a stack of paperwork on the property that went back further than I bothered to read. I read the parts that mattered for the transfer. I did not read the old parts. That was the first mistake, though I would not understand it as a mistake for months. The one open question I could not shake in those first weeks was why my uncle had lived on 11 acres and left the best 10 of them uncleared. There was a strip along the tree line, generous, maybe 150 feet deep and running the whole width of the lot, that was choked with brush and young alder and blackberry, a tangle you could not walk through. Good ground going to waste. I figured he had gotten old and let it go. There were other things in those first weeks that I filed away without understanding. The way you do when you move into a place a dead man loved. My uncle had installed motion lights all along the back of the house, aimed not at the driveway or the doors, where a man worried about burglars would aim them, but out across the yard toward the tree line, a whole bank of them, more light than any yard needs. I thought it was an old man's fear of the dark. There was a heavy sliding bar on the inside of the back door, a piece of hardware you would put on a barn, not a house. There was a shelf in the mudroom with a pair of binoculars and a spiral notebook, and the notebook was full of dates in my uncle's hand. Dates and short notes, backline, quiet, or backline, close, or on 2 pages near the end, backline, 3 nights, and I did not understand a word of it. And I put the notebook in a box, and I have that box still, and I understand every word of it now. Then I found the clause. It was in the deed, not a separate document, written into the deed itself, in the legal description, after the meets and bounds, in the same dry surveyor's language as the rest of it. There was a strip of ground described by exact dimension and bearing, 150 feet deep off the rear property line, running corner to corner, and the deed said, in language I had to read 4 times, that this strip could not be cleared, could not be fenced, could not be mowed, could not be built upon, could not be altered, by prior arrangement. By prior arrangement. That was the phrase. No party named. No party to the arrangement. No date. No explanation. Just a strip of protected ground and 3 words that pointed at something the document would not name. I did what anyone would do. I called the title company. The woman I talked to went quiet, then said she had seen that kind of clause before, on older deeds in that part of the county, and that they usually related to easements or water rights, and that I should have a real estate attorney look at it if I was worried. She did not sound like she believed the easement thing. She sounded like she wanted off the phone. I called the county. The clerk who pulled the records said the same clause showed up on a number of properties along that same line of hills, going back decades, and that, as far as she could tell, it had never been litigated, never been challenged, never been explained. It just ran, property to property, a line on the survey maps that everyone had honored and no one had documented the reason for. I asked the neighbor. Our nearest neighbor was an old man named Ott Deschamps, who had lived on the adjoining lot his whole life and whose own tree-line strip, I now noticed, was just as overgrown as ours. I walked over one afternoon and asked him about the clause. He was friendly right up until I said the words prior arrangement. Then he looked at me for a while and said that his father had kept the line and his father's father had kept the line and that he had kept it too and did not intend to be the one to stop. I asked him, keep it from what? He said I should just keep it and went inside. Here is where I made the decision, and I want to be honest about why, because the why matters. I needed the ground. We were not rich. The plan had always been to clear the back strip for a large garden and a shop building, to make the land pay a little, to justify the move. A clause with no named party and no stated reason, that the title company thought might be an old easement, that the county had no explanation for. Read to me like exactly the kind of small-town superstition that keeps people poor. Somebody 100 years ago had gotten a notion, and everybody after had been too polite or too lazy to question it, and I was not going to let a ghost story cost me the best 10 acres I owned. In the first week of June, I rented a brush cutter, and I started clearing the strip. I want to tell you that I felt something as I started, a warning, a weight, some animal sense that I was doing a thing I should not. I did not. That is the part I have had to make my peace with. There was no sign. The morning I started was an ordinary bright June morning, birds in the alder, my daughter eating cereal on the porch, my wife hanging wash, and I fired up the machine and went at the brush with nothing in my chest but satisfaction at finally getting to work I had been putting off. Whatever watches that line did not stop me. It let me start. I have come to think that is part of how it works, that the letting you start is deliberate, that you are given the whole length of rope, that the arrangement is not a fence but a test, and that the ones who fail it are the ones who mistake the silence at the beginning for permission. The first day was nothing. It was hot, ordinary work, and by evening I had knocked down maybe 40 feet of alder and blackberry along the eastern corner, and I was sore and pleased with myself. My wife brought me a beer, and we stood and looked at the cleared ground, and it felt like progress. My daughter rode her bike in loops on the gravel, while the light went gold and long. And I remember thinking it was the first evening since we moved that had felt entirely like ours. I have gone back to that evening many times. It is the last one that was simple. That night the dogs would not go into the yard. We had two, a shepherd mix and a smaller one. And they lived to be outside. And that night they stood at the back door with their hackles up and would not cross the threshold. And when I pushed the shepherd out with my knee, she came straight back in shaking. I put it down to the brush cutter, some smell, some noise still in her ears. I did not connect it to the strip. Not yet. I am going to give you the next weeks the way they came, one thing at a time, dated. Because the dating is the only way I have ever been able to keep it straight in my own head. And because I have learned that the space between the bad nights matters as much as the bad nights. June the 8th. I cleared another 60 feet of the strip. That evening my wife found the brush I had cut, the whole day's worth, dragged back and repiled along the original line of the tree line. Not scattered, not dumped, placed, laid back down in a low even wall exactly along the survey line. I had been cutting past, as if someone had spent the afternoon undoing my day with great care. I told her a neighbor kid was messing with us. She asked which neighbor kid would stack brush that neatly, and I did not have an answer. June the 12th. Ordinary days in between, good days. My daughter, who was 9, had a birthday, and we had people over, and the trailer was full of my wife's cousins, and it was a good weekend, and I want you to know we had good weekends. Because it was not all dread, it was a life. Then on the 12th, I went out to the strip, and the survey stakes I had driven to mark my clearing line were pulled and stood back up outside the line. On the yard side, driven into hard ground, I had not been able to get a stake into myself, driven deep and standing straight in a row. June the 14th. Nothing at the strip but the trailer. We kept a travel trailer on a gravel pad off to the side of the house for when family came, and that morning it was rocking gently on its jacks. The way it rocks when someone heavy climbs the step and moves around inside. I thought a raccoon had gotten in. I opened it up with a broom handle in my hand, feeling like a fool, and there was nothing inside and nothing had been disturbed inside. But the whole trailer was still swaying on its jacks, slow, settling, as if something that had been leaning against the back of it had just stepped away. I stood in the door of that trailer with the broom handle, and I listened to my own heart, and I did not go around the back to look. I want to be honest about that. I did not look. June the 16th, the dogs again, worse. And in the morning, in the tilled dirt where I had cleared tracks. I am not going to tell you I measured them, because I did not want to. Because measuring them would have meant admitting what I was measuring. They were long. The stride between them was longer than I could step. I raked them out before my daughter woke up, and I told my wife it was elk. She looked at me the way the neighbor had looked at me. She had stopped believing the neighbor kid and the elk somewhere in there, and she was waiting for me to stop too. June the 18th. My daughter came in from the yard in the middle of the afternoon in daylight and asked me who the big man in the trees was. My whole body went cold. I asked her what she meant, keeping my voice easy, and she said there was a big man who stood at the back of the yard by the brush and watched her ride her bike, and that he was nice, and that he had stood very still, so as not to scare her. I asked her if she had told her mother. She said no, because the man had put a finger to his mouth, the way you do when something is a secret. I told her, as calm as I have ever made myself be, that she was not to go near the back of the yard again, not ever, and that there were no secrets in this house between her and her mother and me, none, and that if she saw the big man again, she was to come inside and tell me that second. She started to cry because I had frightened her, and I held her, and over the top of her head I looked out the back window at the wall of brush, and I have never hated anything the way I hated that tree line in that moment. That was the day it stopped being about ground. Whatever was out there had spoken to my child and had asked her to keep it from me. And there is a line in a man that a thing crosses when it does that, and it crossed mine. June the 20th. I went out at first light to walk the strip, and the brush I had piled back was undisturbed, but on the hood of my truck, which was parked by the house, 40 feet from the tree laid out neat, was a row of 6 river stones, graded largest to smallest, wet, as if carried up from the creek that runs the far side of the timber, a quarter-mile off. I did not tell my wife about the stones. I put them in a bucket, and I drove them to the creek, and I put them back in the water, and I do not know why I did that, except that it felt like the only right answer to a thing I did not understand, to give back what had been given, to want no part of the exchange. Ordinary days, that is what I keep coming back to. There were more ordinary days than bad ones. We planted the front garden. I fixed the trailer's water line. My daughter learned to ride a bike on the gravel pad. If you had driven past our place on any afternoon that June, you would have seen a family making a life on a piece of ground, and you would have been right, and you would have missed the whole thing. But I had stopped clearing the strip. I want to be clear about that. After the 16th, I did not run the brush cutter again. I told myself it was because the garden was taking my time. That was a lie I told myself. The truth was that I had started, without admitting it, to keep the line. And I had started to ask why. I went back to Aude Deschamps, the old neighbor, and this time I did not lead with the claws. I brought him a bottle and I sat on his porch and I let him get there himself, and eventually he did. He told me the arrangement went back to the first homestead on our land, back before it was our family's, to a man who had come into that country in the 1890s to log and to farm, and who had, in Otte's father's telling, come to an understanding. Otto would not say an understanding with what. He said the man had cleared his ground right up to a line and no further, and had marked the line, and had made every buyer after him take the line with the land, written into the paper, so it could not be lost. And that, as long as the line was kept, the families along these hills were left alone. I asked him what happened to families that did not keep it. Ott was quiet a long time. Then he told me about a family that had owned our lot, 2 owners back in the 1970s. A younger couple from out of the area who had done exactly what I had done, looked at the good ground going to waste and started to clear it. Otto was a young man then, and he remembered it. He remembered the nights And he remembered that the family did not last a year on the property before they sold it and left the state, and that they left fast, and that they left some of their things behind, which people do not do unless they are leaving something worse than furniture. I asked him what happened to them. He said that was not his to tell. He said the ones who could tell it were the ones who had lived it, and they had gone, and good. I pushed him. That one time, I told him about my daughter, and the big man in the trees and the finger to the mouth, and Ott went very still and set down his glass. And for the first time in all our talking, he looked frightened rather than closed. He asked me, quietly, whether I had put a stop to it, whether I had made the child understand. I said I had. He said good, and said it twice. And then, he told me the one thing about the 70s family that he would ever tell me, which was that they had had a boy, a young boy, and that the summer they were clearing the line. The boy had started talking about a friend at the back of the property. A friend the parents never saw. A friend who left him things, and that the mother had thought it charming right up until it was not. Otto would not say more than that. He said the rest was not his, and he said it in a voice that had gone thin. And he told me to finish my drink and go home and keep my line. And this time, when he said it, he was not unfriendly. He said it like a man giving me the only help he had, and like a man who had just frightened himself worse than he had frightened me. I drove the quarter-mile home in the dark with my headlights carving up the road, and I did not once look at the tree line as I passed it. And I have thought since that the not looking was itself a kind of keeping the line, an agreement my body had made before my mind caught up. The whole area, I came to understand, had been quietly living around this thing for 100 years. Every overgrown strip along that line of hills was a family keeping a bargain nobody had signed, but everybody honored, and nobody had told me. Not the title company, not the county, not the neighbor, not my own uncle, who had left me the paper and the ground and the clause and no word of explanation, and who I now understood had kept the line his whole life, and had, in his silence, been trusting me to read the deed and be smart enough not to need it. Explained, I had not been that smart. And now the thing that the bargain kept off our land knew that the bargain had been broken. The night it came to the window was the 3rd week of June. My wife and daughter were asleep. I was up late in the front room, and something took me to the window that looks out over the backyard, toward the tree line, the strip, the trucks parked on the gravel, the trailer on its pad. It was a clear night, and there was enough light from the yard fixture to see by. There was a Sasquatch standing in the yard. It was out past the trucks, on the open grass between the trailer and the tree line, standing full height and facing the house. It was over 7 feet tall, and it stood the way a man stands who has decided to be seen, weight square, arms hanging, and even at that distance and in that poor light, the size of it against the trucks behind it did not make sense. My eye kept trying to shrink it and failing. It was far more Neanderthal than ape. It had a heavy bony brow ridge and a broad prominent nose and a wide flat human-like face with no muzzle to it. A face that was turned toward my window and was looking at me the way a person looks at you, not the way an animal looks at you. Its hair was long and hanging, dark rust brown at the shoulders shading to charcoal, matted into ropes down its arms and legs. Where the skin showed it was a weathered gray-brown. Its eyes threw back the yard light, flat and reflective. 2 pale points fixed on the glass, and there was a torn notch out of the top of its left ear. I am telling you about the ear because the ear is the thing that broke me. An animal in the dark is a shape you can argue with. An old, healed injury on a specific ear is a fact, and it stood in my yard as a fact, and it looked at me, and it did not come one step closer. That was the thing I understood, standing at the glass with my heart going. It was not coming closer. It was standing exactly where the tree line strip ended and the cleared ground began. It was standing on the line, my line, the line I had cut past. It had come to the edge of the ground I had taken from the bargain, and it was standing there at the border of what I had broken, and it was letting me see it so that I would understand what I had let onto my land. I did not wake my wife. I stood at the window, and it stood in the yard, and I do not know how long that lasted. And then between one blink and the next, it was not there. And the yard was just a yard, and I went and checked the locks on every door in the house, though I knew a lock was not the point. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the front room with every light in the house on, and my uncle's binoculars in my lap, which I had brought in from the mudroom without quite deciding to And near 4 in the morning, I understood why my uncle had aimed his motion lights the way he had, out across the yard, and not at the doors. Because a man who has stood where I was standing does not fear a thing that picks a lock. He fears a thing that stands in the open and lets you see it and waits for you to understand. My uncle had spent 40 years lighting up the ground between the house and the tree line so that he would always know exactly where the line was and exactly what was standing on the far side of it. And I had moved into his house and thought him a frightened old man. And I sat there at 4 in the morning in a blaze of light. I finally understood, and I was ashamed of every easy thing I had thought about him. In the morning I went out to the yard, in daylight, with my heart still not right, and I stood where it had stood. The grass was pressed flat in a patch, and the patch was where the tree line strip ended, and my cleared ground began, exactly on the survey line. Not a foot to either side of it. It had stood on the line. It had come no further onto the ground I had taken than the very edge of it, as if the line still meant something to it, even where I had erased it, as if it were showing me the border I had crossed by standing precisely on the last inch of its side of it. I have thought about that patch of flattened grass more than almost anything, a thing that could have come to my door and did not. A thing that came to the line and stopped, and let me see that it had stopped, and left the stopping for me to read. The next morning, I got the brush cutter out, and I did not clear the strip. I ran the machine the other way. I mulched down what I had planted in the cleared ground. I pulled the survey stakes, and I let the eastern corner start going back to the brush it had been. I planted alder whips along the line. I put it back. I gave the ground back to the strip, foot by foot, over that summer. And I made my wife understand, without ever quite saying it, that the back 150 feet of our land was not ours and never had been. I told her the truth, in the end. Not all at once, and not all of it, but enough. I told her what our daughter had told me about the big man in the trees, and I watched her face do the thing my own face had done at the window. The falling, the tilt of the ground. And then I watched her decide, the way I had decided, that the only thing that mattered now was the child and the line. We did not fight about whether it was real. That is a thing I have noticed about people who have actually stood at the glass. They stop arguing about whether, they only argue about what to do, and my wife and I did not even argue about that. We kept the line together after that. We were quieter with each other for a long while, the way you are after you have seen the same impossible thing and know the other one saw it too. We told our daughter that the big man was not a friend and was not to be spoken to, and was not to be kept a secret about. And we told her, without frightening her worse. And children are better at carrying these things than we give them credit for, and she carried it. She still asks about him sometimes, years on. We tell her he keeps to his side of the yard now, and that we keep to ours, and that this is how it is supposed to be, and she seems to find that enough. I hope she finds it enough. I have written things into the will to make sure that whatever else she inherits the truth of it plainly, so that she never has to learn it the way I did. The nights got quiet again. Not all at once. The presence at the tree line receded the way a tide goes out, still there, further off, and then further, until the dogs would go into the yard again, and my daughter's bike on the gravel was the only sound out back after dark. And late that summer, Otto Deschamps came over, which he had never done, and stood at the edge of my newly overgrown strip and looked at it for a while. And then he nodded once, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and he did not say anything, and he went home. That was the whole of it. That was the arrangement acknowledging that I was inside it now. A nod from an old man at the edge of a line of brush. I never learned what the arrangement was, in the sense of what was agreed, or when, or by whom on the other side of it, or what it is for. I know only that it is with a Sasquatch, or with more than one, or with whatever a Sasquatch is, when it has been keeping a bargain with human families for 100 years. And I know that it keeps to its side, as long as we keep to ours. And I know that what it does when we do not keep to ours is the thing that the deed will not name, and the neighbor would not tell, and the county has no record of. But I did learn one thing about the family that cleared the line before me. The couple from the 1970s who left fast and left their things behind. Otto told me, near the end, the one concrete thing he would give me. He told me that when that family left, there were 3 of them who came and 2 of them who went. He would not say which one stayed behind in that country. or in what way they stayed. He said it was not his to tell, and that I did not need it, and that I had my line now, and I should keep it, and I should teach my daughter to keep it, and her children after her. I kept my uncle's notebook. I read it now the way you read a letter from someone who tried to warn you and could not find the words that would have worked before you needed them. Backline. Quiet. Backline. Close. Backline. 3 nights. 40 years of a man watching the tree line from his back window with a pair of binoculars and writing down what came and keeping the line and keeping it and never once telling me because he could not put it in a letter and be believed, and because the deed said it plainer than he ever could, and because he trusted the paper to do what he could not. I have added my own dates to the back of that notebook now, my handwriting under his, the same short words. It is the truest thing I own. The strip along our tree line is a wall of brush again. You cannot walk through it. On the survey map there is a line, 150 feet deep, corner to corner, that cannot be cleared or fenced or built upon by prior arrangement, and there is no party named, and there never will be. And I have already written into my own will that whoever takes this land takes the line with it, and had better be smart enough not to need it, explained. I was not that smart. I was lucky. The family before me was not. Real or fake, you decide.